Zamorak, the god of chaos, power, and destruction, is the most infamous god in RuneScape. He is often considered the embodiment of true evil, and the undying allegiance sworn to him by hordes of demons, werewolves, necromancers, and vampires associates his name with the most horrific species and races known in the fantasy realm of Gielinor. His many cults and worshippers have engaged in some of RuneScape's most vicious conspiracies, and Zamorak himself, in his disregard for those weaker than him, committed the greatest atrocity ever seen in Gielinor. But what was his motive? Where did he and his power come from? And most importantly, how did a god who seemed to openly preach an embracing of evil gain such a massive following that his army outnumbered those of his adversaries combined by the end of the Gielinor God Wars? To understand the Lord of Chaos, we must understand the desolate land of his origin. Zamorak began his life on a distant, broken planet called Freneskae. This barren realm was as green and thriving as Gielinor many eons ago, but in the heart of this planet were 5 eggs that would spell its doom. These eggs contained the Elder Gods, eternal divine beings who would reincarnate from these eggs into each new cycle of the RuneScape universe. 4 of these eggs would hatch without issue, but the 5th did not stir, and seemed completely still inside. Believing their counterpart to have been stillborn, the remaining 4 Elder Gods sapped Freneskae of its anima mundi, the life force generated by a planet pulsing with life and the food and fuel for these creator gods, leaving a broken, lifeless landscape and a cold, solitary egg as they departed to begin the struggle of crafting a universe without their companion. But the god inside the egg was not dead. And surprisingly, a few millennia after the Elder Gods left the realm torn, it hatched. The Elder God Mah would never gain what one could consider to be true consciousness or sentience. Having failed to absorb anima mundi as an egg, and having none left to nourish her now, Mah had the mind of a child and the powers of a god, stuck alone and helpless in the darkness of a broken planet. Without the ability to learn, she could only perceive darkness and light, and would soon craft 2 immensely powerful assistants that embodied the only 2 concepts she understood. Their names were Zaros and Seren, and they tended to her for millennia as her restless nightmares caused devastating earthquakes and spontaneous life creation, like the dimension-warping Muspa monsters. Eventually, Zaros would abandon Mah, seeking higher purpose for his immense powers and knowledge, and in the horrific night terrors caused by her immortal plaything's departure, she would accidentally create not 2 beings, but an entire race, known as the Dreams of Mah. As Freneskae was harsh, and Mah's creation struggled to survive in its wastes, the Dreams of Mah would be divided by constant warfare, and soon split into 4 tribes, all containing the names of their worshipped creator god: the Chelon Mah, the Mahjarrat, the Mahjarrat, and the Mahjarrat, or Children of Mah. The Mahjarrat were among the fiercest warriors, and despite their creator being simple-minded, the Children of Mah were arguably the most powerful race ever created in the RuneScape world. The Elder Gods were designed to create planets, with the life that arose on their surfaces being a natural and spontaneous cycle that was more or less beneath their notice. When their divine powers were focused into a species, they were born with supernatural abilities like bending the will of conscious beings, conjuring magical spells and curses for war, and the ability to absorb life and power from each other, guaranteeing them immortality, provided that one of their number was periodically sacrificed to keep the others alive. Which Mahjarrat would be sacrificed was determined in the only way they understood: through battle, with the weakest of their members being siphoned, rejuvenating their brothers from fleshless skeletons into their shadowy, shape-shifting true form. Zamorak, having been brought to life in Freneskae, would shape his philosophy from the law in the realm of constant warfare.
The weak deserve to die so the strong may flourish. This is the will of Zamorak.
While little is known of Zamorak's life in his home world, it is known that he was in attendance when 2 divine siblings, Amascut and Icthlarin, traveled to Freneskae to plead for assistance in a vicious god war in their realm. They explained that an invading force of supernatural armies was slaughtering their father's people, and assured the few hundred Mahjarrat that a glorious battle and endless spoils awaited them in a beautiful green world called Gielinor. though the Mahjarrat had a characteristic battle over whether or not they should accept the offer, with one facing true death and another being sacrificed to the ritual of rejuvenation. Most of their number would go with Amascut and Icthlarin through the World Gate, with several being openly excited at leaving behind the desolate Freneskae and arrive in the stunning and lush Caridian kingdom, where Tumeken and his followers, the Mennephite, were close to defeat and certain death. Among these original Mahjarrat who agreed to take part in the earliest stages of the Gielinor God Wars were Haziel, the manipulative and cunning warlord with distinctive horns on his forehead, his cousin Lucian, a power-hungry and remorseless necromancer, Zamorak, a vicious veteran of many battles with a particular lust for bloodshed, and Zamorak, himself being one of the most powerful and ambitious of their kind. To the races of Gielinor engaged in this war, this new addition to Tumeken's army was godlike in their supernatural ability and demonic in their indifference to life. The Mahjarrat immediately began to destroy the invading armies of vampires and demons in the northern Caridian territories, causing complete devastation and leaving no survivors as the invaders turned to flee. These shape-shifting forces were called the Faceless Ones and the stern judges of Icthlarin by the retreating and defeated armies. But Freneskae, perhaps the most cunning of all of his race of manipulators, soon took pause when he heard the name of the opposing god, Zaros. Since the Mahjarrat, and all the Dreams of Mah, were created in the wake of the departure of Zaros, they had never met or heard of this all-powerful brother who was elevated far above them in abilities, as he was the pure embodiment of darkness and shadow, and a fellow child of Mah. After a discussion with one of Zaros' legates, a Chthonian demon named Duke Ceres, Freneskae arranged a meeting with Zaros, and found that, indeed, this legendary god had been created by Mah even eons before himself, as Zaros and Seren had possibly spent millions of years with her before he was able to break the supernatural manipulation causing him to stay. Perhaps with his own motivations, Freneskae returned to the Mahjarrat and informed them of his discovery, telling his kin that he had found their true god, who was far more fit to lead the violent Mahjarrat than the now semi-mythical Mah. As usual, this was met with resistance, until Zaros soon met with all of the Mahjarrat himself, showing his powers and his knowledge of Freneskae, and promising eternal conquest for his spiritual brothers, asserting their right to rule as the only true divine god and race to combine forces for warfare. Among the most agreeable to these terms was Zamorak, who boldly declared support for turning his cloak, and the Mahjarrat converted to the Zarosian religion as they decided to betray Tumeken and the Menephites.
Zamorakian scum!
The Mahjarrat now took command of the armies they'd once decimated, with Zamorak himself being appointed as a legatus, commander of an entire legion, and raining hell upon the Mennephite people with such ferocity that he became known as the Scourge of the battlefield. Soon, it became apparent that Tumeken and his armies would be defeated, and in a final act of desperation, Tumeken sacrificed himself in a divine explosion, destroying almost his entire kingdom and turning it into an arid desert, eradicating his own armies and a large number of the Mahjarrat. Despite this heavy loss of Mahjarrat numbers, this was the final victory for Zaros over the Mennephite pantheon of gods, and opened the door for his campaign to focus their forces on other armies in Gielinor, such as that of Saradomin, a human who used a magical crown to call himself a god, and Bandos, a warmonger from a distant realm, among others. Though Zaros had promised the Mahjarrat eternal conquest until they were rulers of the realm, he soon underwent a noticeable shift in his once endless ambitions. He was deeply troubled by Tumeken's sacrifice, mystified that a powerful being like Tumeken would rather destroy himself than be ruled by Zaros. He also began to resent his innate ability to control others and instill loyalty and devotion in those close to him, feeling that it was no different than what Mah had done to himself and his sister Seren for millennia. And after a few more campaigns, he promoted Zamorak to the position of Legatus Maximus, the supreme commander of the Zarosian army, and promoted his cohort, Azanadra, to Pontifex Maximus, in charge of arranging civilization and running the empire. From this point forward, Zaros would leave the rule of Gielinor to Azanadra and Zamorak for centuries at a time, being absent so often that some began to call him the Empty Lord. The empire began to crumble to the constant attacks of the burgeoning Gielinor God Wars on all fronts, as the Zarosian territory was by far the largest kingdom that the realm would ever know, stretching from the northern shores of what was then known as Forinthry to the smoking remnants of Tumeken's kingdom in the south. As the various evil races that Zaros had brought to Gielinor with promises of war and bloodshed grew more and more restless, Zamorak began to feel that Zaros had lied to him and the other Mahjarrat, and in utter secrecy, he began to foment a rebellion. He wanted to overthrow the Lord of Darkness, but as strong as he wasn't going to be able to do it alone. So he set out to secure alliances, knowing which amongst the Mahjarrat and leaders of the other races had grown restless in their complacency and ripe for rebellion. Out of the many commanders in Zaros' army, only one was a human, a heinous warrior named Viggora. Despite his relatively high rank as a general in Zaros' army, he knew that further promotion or even respect from Zaros wasn't possible, as it was incompatible with Zaros' belief that he and the other children of Mah were the supreme ruling race in the universe. Zamorak informed Viggora that the Mahjarrat, and especially Zamorak himself, held no such view. Anyone who could stand up in the face of trouble, adversity, or war, fight for survival, and emerge victorious was worthy of respect under the newly forming Zamorakian creed.
May you reject all safe paths and embrace all challenges. Zamorak bring you strength.
After being promised a top position in Zamorak's army after the rebellion was underway, Viggora agreed to betray Zaros and became one of the first Zamorakians. Zamorak's next move was as calculated as his first. Saradomin had managed to maintain a vast and sparkling stronghold to the east in the sacred land of Hallowvale. Having built massive palaces with one of his converted races, the winged mind-reading Icthlarin, Saradomin held a thriving kingdom with tens of thousands of humans and endless miles of farms. Knowing that this hotly contested region was his enemy's greatest asset, Zamorak met in secret with Lowernial Draken, one of the vampires who had come to Gielinor to assist Zaros, before exploding their presence in the realm through spreading their vampiric curse as an act of warfare. Although Zamorak didn't necessarily agree on all topics and creeds with the black-hearted Draken, who believed that any race that wasn't inherently immortal, like humans, were basically no more than cattle, and that true-born vampires were the pinnacle of the universe's species, he did know Draken yearned for much more blood for he and his species than the Zarosian law allowed, and knew an ambitious mind when he met one. Promising to let Lowernial Draken become the lord of all Hallowvale if he could capture it during the rebellion and drink all of the blood that he could forcefully take, Zamorak secured another alliance in his quest to overthrow Zaros. He then easily convinced a few of his fellow Mahjarrat that he was the ruler they needed, and Haziel, Lucian, and Zamoragal began secretly supporting him as well, longing for bloodshed and war. But vampires and Mahjarrat were just a part of what Zamorak would need to take control of the Empire. So for his final alliance, he went to the demons. Zaros had brought Chthonian demons, a huge and disgusting race from a hellish realm known as Infernus many centuries before. The leader of these demons, Hostilius, tried to trick Zaros, as his kind always do when engaging in infernal contracts, but he was outwitted by Zaros, and ultimately signed the command of more than 20,000 Chthonian demons over to his control, for nothing in return. The Chthonians were taught caste and society by Zaros, much as the vampires had been, and the demons had long ago enslaved a lesser race of demons known as the Avernics. The Avernic demons ranged widely in size, and were split into 3 tribes, with the largest and most brutal being the Sutzeroth. Zamorak approached the largest and most evil of the Sutzeroths, a gargantuan demon named Krill, and told him that he had intentions of capturing the divine ability to travel between realms from his lord, and promised that if the Avernics aided him in his rebellion, he would travel to their home realm to overthrow the Chthonians and liberate their species from slavery. Krill and the other Avernics agreed, and their nearly endless number joined the ranks of the silent coup forming against Zaros. The final key to Zamorak's betrayal fell into his hands, perhaps by fate. A Saradominus monk had discovered one of the Elder artifacts, the tools crafted by the Elder gods in their desperate attempt to fill the void in their powers left by the supposed stillbirth of Mah. These sacred reality-bending objects had their own unique powers and purposes, and at this point in history, their number was unknown, though it was known that Saradomin's crown, and the source of his power, was one of them. The object at hand was now known as the Staff of Armadyl, having been discovered by Armadyl before being further hidden to avoid the devastating impact that such an artifact could carry out. But its real name was the Siphon, a tool to absorb the power of life and anima mundi from any source it pierced. The staff would give certain victory to Saradomin, but was stolen from its discoverer before a Zarosian supporter got it into the hands of Zamorak, who saw his obtaining a divine artifact during an upcoming attack against a god as a sign of fate in his favor. With the silent support of countless demons, hordes of vampires, packs of werewolves, and shadowy Mahjarrat, Zamorak had Viggora lead a large part of the Zarosian Empire's army into a false campaign into Hallowvale, claiming that there was an urgent military issue. This substantially weakened the presence of Zarosian loyalists and armies in Sintistan, the great capital city built where Zaros had entered when he found the realm, and the location of the castle where Zamorak marched with his armies on the day he demanded the Empty Lord's presence to address a mysterious threat to the Empire. Zaros arrived in his throne room, where Zamorak demanded that the god give him complete control of the Empire and leave the realm forever. Zaros, infuriated at what he saw as no more than an insolent outburst, instructed Azenadra to take care of Zamorak, but Azenadra was immediately knocked out as the other Zarosian loyalists were instantly attacked and killed by the new Zamorakian rebels, and Zamorak leapt across the throne room towards Zaros. Perhaps his reflexes faltered. Maybe he underestimated Zamorak's ambition. Whatever the reason, Zaros did not evade Zamorak's attack, and the Staff of Armadyl impaled his chest, and in the ensuing struggle, Zamorak was also pierced, which unintentionally began to siphon power from the Lord into the Conqueror. Zamorak fell to the floor of the throne room, convulsing and screaming in pain as his body was racked with the transformation of absorbing Zaros' essence. After minutes of writhing on the ground, Zamorak, Lord of Chaos, Scourge of the battlefield and newly ascended god, rose from the floor, bringing the realm of Gielinor into the Third Age, and beginning the God Wars in earnest, as furious battles erupted across the land to claim the remnants of the defeated god's territories.
Zaros has fallen.
Zamorak was now the ruler of hordes of bloodthirsty armies bowing down to him, supporting his goal of world domination. And having ascended, he was a de facto force in the Gielinor God Wars erupting around him. Saradomin's forces were swiftly moving to attack the murder god's territories, immediately declaring war against Zamorak and mobilizing his armies to march on Sintistan. But to his surprise, Zarosian loyalists had managed to hold the city, and Zamorak was no longer there. Having attained the ability to travel through realms, Zamorak's first command as the Lord of Chaos was retreat, but not to escape from the armies he had brought down on his own head. Zamorak gathered a majority of his forces and left Gielinor for either 17 or 19 years, storming the demonic realm of Infernus and rebelling against the planet-sized demon god Hostilius to liberate the Avernic demons from slavery. After many years of warfare and sabotage against the endless legions of Chthonians, Hostilius the planet demon was neutralized, though many doubt that such a creature can experience true death, and Zamorak shoved his immobilized body into the rift between dimensions. Hostilius' body is so incomprehensibly massive that it can be fully explored and accessed to anyone who knows the secret of traveling through realms, and his lifeless corpse came to be known as the Abyss by the stunned magicians who would later discover this connector world to other dimensions. In the quest Desert Treasure 2, parts of Hostilius' brain and body must be rebuilt to gain access to a sea monster parasite called the Leviathan that had taken up residence in his guts. Zamorak's victory in the rebellion against Hostilius gave him his most powerful asset, seemingly infinite armies of Avernic demons, multiplying his army by orders of magnitude and securing the most devoted and devout worshippers that any god could ever ask for. To this day, every Avernic demon declares loyalty to Zamorak as they worship the legend of the Lord who liberated their people. With forces beyond measure, Zamorak returned to Gielinor and declared war on the other gods, and seeking to secure the elder artifact known as the Stone of Jas, a divine and misunderstood tool that had fallen into Zamorak's possession before his betrayal of Zaros, but had been successfully reclaimed by Saradominus forces. And though it is not known if Zamorak had the stone when he destroyed Zaros, he was certain that regaining it, in combination with the Staff of Armadyl, would give him guaranteed victory and usher in a Zamorakian planet. Upon returning to the realm that he wished to call his own, Zamorak was surprised to find Zarosian Mahjarrat and loyalists still holding territories, and that Saradomin had not managed to conquer the capital city of Sintistan during his absence. Recognizing the potential that their mutual enemy had to continue being troublesome, Saradomin and Zamorak initially focused on defeating and capturing Zarosian outposts to expand their empires and territories, rather than immediately engaging in battle. Unless they crossed paths, of course. The battles and destruction of the Zarosian Extermination at the beginning of the Third Age was so drastic that several races moved underground to avoid death. The dwarves built a sprawling subterranean kingdom called Keldagrim, and gnomes took refuge beneath the protective roots of their beloved and holy Grand Tree. Some armies were crumbling from within, as a large portion of the battalion of Bandos, a warmongering rhinoceros creature with horizons worth of goblins, rebelled against him and escaped deep under the earth to avoid his brutal battle tactics. This offshoot of goblins, called the Dorgashun, would go on to physically adapt to the caves and focus on intellect and technology and largely forget their origins over time, only knowing that if they returned to the place where the sun touched their skin, the war god would make them die. Zamorak engaged in a successful attack on the beautiful Zarosian city of Karalangar, where two massive demon siblings named Skotizo and Zalcano dutifully helped capture the citizens and convert the strategically located town to Zamorak's rule. Impressed with the tenacity of these two creatures, he personally appointed them to a mission, sending them with a battalion of soldiers to seek an artifact deep in the Karatzi jungle on the island of Karamja. While the name of this powerful tool is unknown to the modern age, the campaign was successful, and when Skotizo found the artifact that he'd been sent by Zamorak to retrieve, he murdered the team of soldiers surrounding him and abandoned his sister Zalcano, fleeing west with the powerful object in his possession. Zamorak, who himself had done things like this many times by now, was outraged, and after learning from Zalcano that her brother had gone west, he mistakenly assumed that he was hiding with the elves in the crystal city of Prifdennus. To assure the return of this artifact, Zamorak cast a curse on Zalcano that slowly began to turn her into stone, and deployed her to the kingdom of Tiranin to find her brother and bring him back. The elves soon caught terrified glimpses of the giant demon roaming their countryside, but realizing that she'd been weakened by a curse, they successfully lured and trapped her in a volcanic mine. Zamorak, telepathically sensing her failure, finished his curse, turning Zalcano fully into stone, and she remains trapped by the elves to this day, muttering the name of her brother for all eternity, and long insane. To make matters worse, Skotizo was never in the land of the elves. He had fled further west than the God Wars would ever reach, to a then barely populated continent known as Zaya, and used the artifact to carve deep catacombs under a burgeoning village, ushering in hundreds of cursed creatures to help protect him from the wrath of Zamorak in the event that the Lord of Chaos should ever find him. Following this betrayal, Zamorak turned his sights to destroying his remaining enemies. As the castle and capital city of Sentistan was still held by Zarosian loyalists, Saradomin and Zamorak joined forces for the first and last time in their legendary rivalry, working together to finally conquer the walls of Sentistan. Zamorak would claim victory in the ensuing battle over the remnants of the city, but eventually they would pass back to Saradomin, who engaged in a massive project to completely destroy and replace every remnant of Zaros, erecting a church to himself over its ruins. This once grand city was so thoroughly broken that it would be thousands of years before its fragments were found, in an archaeological area now known as the Dig Site. In a retaliatory campaign, Zamorak's armies burned the Wizard's Tower, a magical institution that studied the art of crafting runes, and although the tower was rebuilt, the knowledge of accessing the rune essence mines was lost for millennia, causing a global shortage of runestones and severely hindering magical progress in society. Soon, Saradomin became immersed in a vicious campaign to stop the few remaining Zarosian Mahjarrat from securing the site deep in the snowy wastes of Trollweiss, where they hoped to engage in a ritual of rejuvenation to bring themselves to true power and reclaim Gielinor for Zaros. As Saradomin and his followers dealt with a brutal attack from Zaros' most powerful and vicious creation, Nex, who came from a bastardized combination of vampires, aviances, Icthlarin, and demons called Nihil, Zamorak, somehow, somewhere, managed to find the Stone of Jazz. The Stone of Jazz was truly named the Catalyst, but was also called the Eye by Saradominus when it was in their possession, and the Fist of Guthix by others, and as usual, none of these so-called gods knew its true purpose or power. This legendary stone was left behind by the Elder God Jazz when Gielinor was formed, and it had many homes during its time here, having once been kept deep beneath the Freneskae Isles, as its divine power created the sprawling rune essence mine, and the fist and the mines were discovered by an ancient hero of the Fremenix, V, who used its power to awaken his inner self by walking through his own dreams, and formed the telepathic mages known as the Moon Clan. It was also kept for a period in the Temple of the Eye by Saradominus, but perhaps its last verified home was beneath the cursed swamps of Mauritania, where its plinth can be seen in the Dayalt Essence mine, once again having transformed the nearby stone into powerful rune essence. Since Lwerniel Draken had successfully overthrown Saradomin and Hallowvale and renamed his kingdom Mauritania, allowing his vampires to modify and expand Saradomin's existing architecture, it's possible that the stone was found by Draken or the vampires and given in secrecy to his master, who now finally held in his hands the keys to world domination. Word spread quickly of Zamorak's new toy, and the other main gods in the Gielinor God Wars had to act immediately. Saradomin, the human from Terragard who had ascended after finding an elder artifact called the Locator. Bandos, a giant brutish warmonger from a race with the features of rhinoceroses. And Armadyl, the leader of the bird-like Aviantes, who had hidden the Staff of Armadyl to prevent these precise circumstances, met in secret to form an alliance to stop the Unholy One. Using spellforged metal and imbuing the hilt with fantastical magics, the three constructed the God Sword, a holy weapon charged with each of their attributes and desires, as a weapon to counter Zamorak's 2 elder artifacts. Unfortunately for the trio, Zamorak had spies in every corner of Gielinor, and word soon traveled to him that the armies would be moving the secret weapon to a fortress in the land of the Trolls near Forinthry, the vast and sparkling continent once entirely held by Zaros. As Armadyl and his armies transported the sword, the entire coalition was fallen upon by Zamorak's immense forces, and the temple underground erupted into one of the most vicious battles yet seen in the God Wars, with such confusion that allies killed allies and foes spared foes. Despite Zamorak's massive numbers, his laws of chaos couldn't topple the strategic prowess of these militia-loving gods, and the battle turned against them as the 3 armies closed in to surround him. Zamorak turned to flee, clutching the Staff of Armadyl and Stone of Jazz, and made his way to a snowy peak overlooking the green and thriving continent of Forinthry. After being cornered, Zamorak's emotions ran high, and he began to beg for his life, an outpouring of fear and emotion that began to destabilize the Stone of Jazz that he clutched in his shaking fingers. Armadyl, who seemed to have some knowledge of the power of the Elder Artifacts, shouted to warn Zamorak that he must control his emotions or the stone could kill them all.
Careful, Zamorak!
As if he had not heard Armadyl's warning, he told Armadyl and Bandos that Saradomin was the evildoer and the liar, and that everything Zamorak had done, he had done to make Gielinor stronger, believing that through chaos and adversity, those who overcome challenges will become stronger, and those who fail will be purged. Armadyl, presumably under the influence of this psychically manipulative Mahjarrat, turned to Saradomin in confusion, who quickly insisted that Zamorak was lying, but Bandos, who was something more like a psychopath, was mocking the Lord of Chaos for begging for his life, instead of honorably facing the death he chose by calling himself a god. With the 3 now having decided to end their mutual enemy once and for all, Saradomin took a step towards Zamorak, who in terror clutched the Stone of Jazz and caused an explosion so vast that the entirety of Forinthry was completely destroyed. This act of utter horror made several species, such as Orgs, Iceyene, and Aviances, immediately become extinct. The curse of the stone was so devastating that life could not be sustained in the ground, and this lawless and dangerous ruin that is policed by no kingdom would come to be known as the Wilderness in the following years. A broken and barren landscape exactly like the realm in which Zamorak was born. Every vast city was leveled, every towering temple had been turned to gravel, and everything, everywhere, was dead, or cursed into the tortured souls of their former lives by the evil intention behind the use of the stone. The gods had survived the blast, and as they were stunned in horror, Zamorak made his escape, hurt, but alive. But this death and destruction had consequences that none of them could have predicted. When this continent-wide damage ended an unimaginable amount of life, the Anima Mundi itself cried out in agony at this upset of balance, which would awaken Guthix, the Naragi who had become a god by mistake during a god war on his planet, and the owner and discoverer of Gielinor. After one of Guthix's mages, Aeternam, froze the battle underground in Forinthry, Guthix was brought fully to consciousness by a team of his most devoted servants, and he and his armies teleported to Forinthry, where he was devastated by the sight of something so terrible and yet so familiar to him. The absolute death and ruin caused by the indifference of these so-called gods and their interdimensional weapons. As Guthix had intended for no other gods to ever enter Gielinor, and even wanted himself to be forgotten from the mythos of the realm, he set immediately to work despite his extreme distress, crafting a string of auras, spells, enchantments, and curses so incredibly powerful that they changed the laws of reality in Gielinor. These spells and rules were called the Edicts of Guthix, and were essentially an anima mundi detector, meaning any creature who had too much power would not be allowed to enter this realm. He also warned the armies and gods that if somehow another god war did break out in his realm, he would end all life on its surface without mercy and start over from the beginning. Now that he had crafted the Guthixian Edicts, it was time to banish all of the gods who were dashing to hide from him, and he prioritized the one who had caused this horror. Zamorak had been gravely wounded in the battle for the Godsword, and Guthix found him quickly. Perhaps he looked with some type of pity on this Mahjarrat who would call himself a god. As Guthix believed that a certain degree of chaos and evil was necessary to have a world in balance, it's possible that he merely saw Zamorak's creed as one side of the coin. But whatever his beliefs regarding Zamorak's so-called religion, mercy was not shown, and Zamorak was instantly banished from Gielinor and has never been seen or heard of again. But he's not dead. Guthix allowed all of the gods to face banishment without death, and so Zamorak is somewhere in the RuneScape universe, keeping his paranoid eyes peeled for the shadow of Zaros, who he always believed was not truly killed by his betrayal, and expected him to return for vengeance. As long as the Guthixian Edicts are in place, Zamorak, and all of the other gods of Gielinor, may only interfere through prayers and blessings and not themselves come to the planet. But, if the Guthixian Edicts were ever to fall, well, I suppose there would be chaos.